So, as we jump into today's message, I actually wanted to continue along in the show and tell. My wife and I had the pleasure in October of going to the country of Japan. Now, I'd like to say that, we were there for some philanthropic reason, sharing the gospel or, widows and orphans and stuff like that, or teaching church leaders, but now we were just there for vacation and just for fun, Japan has actually been kind of a bucket list trip for me. Growing up, there's been a lot of their cultural stuff that just makes it over here to the States. So, for instance, growing up, many of the Japanese cartoons would make it over here stateside, and of course, I'd watch those on Cartoon Network and the WB channel Saturday morning, and they would show cartoons. They would. Pokemon and stuff made it over here, so I collected Pokemon cards when I was a kid. Those are still awesome. I still have my Charizard card, which is first edition. It's great. It's in my top drawer where I keep all my cool stuff. Of course, I grew up playing Nintendo games, PlayStation games, and of course on the Internet of Things, just, some of their stuff just makes it over here. So, of course, I've become aware of like sumo wrestlers and geisha girls and, like robot cafes and just all the cool tech and stuff that they have over there. Some of the tech kind of freaks you out at first. I think one of the most daunting experiences is that we go into a public restroom and the toilets are just so advanced that like you walk in, the toilet seat opens up and then like it's scary because there's all these like buttons and you have no idea what the flush is. And so there I am with like Google Translate holding my phone up to it, hoping that it will like give me the answer to that. So you just push buttons and hopefully one of them works. So anyways, I'll show you some cool things we got to experience. So we got to go to Tokyo, we got to go to Kyoto in a cool mountain town called Nikko. This is Tokyo, biggest city in the world. Humongous, it's absolutely gigantic. I mean, you look at Tucson's downtown, got like 3 buildings. We're doing good. But man, they just got like skyscrapers and stuff everywhere. And this is just one direction, by the way. Just everywhere that you go, just as far as the eye can see, is just civilization. And of course, with all of that comes like millions and millions and millions of people. So I've never been to a big city like New York or anything like that. So seeing all this is quite daunting. And if you have a bubble, you shouldn't. Because it's going to get popped in like the first 2 seconds. So this is actually Shibuya Crossing. It's the busiest intersection in the world, and so there's just thousands and thousands of people that cross just daily and like even every hour even. And you can see there just some of the buildings are really lit up and there's just like screens and stuff everywhere. So it's very cool. There's gardens that we have to experience. There's very beautiful gardens just everywhere. It's very serene, actually. You have the bustling city in the background, but just like across the street or something from like a very busy intersection, you'll have like a garden, and it's just very quiet, and it's beautiful and nice. So that's me and my wife, and we're at another garden, and so we were there. The leaves are starting to change, and of course, they got like beautiful ponds and lakes and things, and just everything's really gorgeous there. The scenery's gorgeous, and of course, Johanna and I love ramen and we love sushi. So the cuisine is just tops for us, man. So we go there. They have this is just one of the dishes that we've had. They have plastic food in front of many of the restaurants. So if you I don't speak any Japanese, so for the most part, you can just look in front of the restaurant, see what looks good, and you can point to a picture later on. But the great thing is that they're hosting the 2020 Olympics, so a lot of this stuff is becoming very international friendly, very English friendly. So when you're on trains and things, they'll speak English. When you're in restaurants, they'll have English menus for you. So there's no worry there. So this is one of those conveyor belt sushi things that we got to try. Very cool. Didn't actually know how it worked, so me and Johanna kind of sat there for the first 5 minutes very awkwardly, and kind of the chefs were like, "Come on, dude, you gonna eat?" And so luckily there's this English-speaking Irish couple next to us, And we asked them how this thing works, and they showed us, you just take the sushi, and then you just stack all these plates after you eat the sushi. So at the end, they charge you by how big your stack is. And of course, all the plates are color-coded, so they can see, like, okay, this one's $1, this one's $3, and so they just add it all up at the end. And yeah, it's pretty fun. We saw like some bigger groups of people there, and of course, like tables of 6 can just like eat through sushi like this, so they get just like this fat stack like this, and it's just it's no competition, but we ate a lot of sushi. So this is one of the bizarre things they have there is these animal cafes. This is me holding a hedgehog. It's very cute. They have all these cafes with just animals, and you just go and you hold and play and touch animals, and you like drink just tea, and that's it. But it's really great. It's like really very therapeutic, and like very nice and chill, and the hedgehog was very nice, and tea was good, and so it was a very nice experience. That was until it's like, oh, this is so great. I want to do it again. So we went to an owl cafe. And they got cafes for everything. There's like foxes, there's like dogs, and there's cats, and there's like all sorts of other animals that you can, cafe animals that you can go see. So here's a bunch of owls that we got to see, and yeah, this one's a little bit freakier than hedgehogs because they're predatory birds. They got humongous talons, and they just look at you with the stare of death when you come near them. So they just look so angry, and you come and you're just like trying to like pet it, and you just at any moment it could turn and just like nip you or something like that. So I liked it. Johanna hated it, but she can tell you why later. So there's beautiful scenery everywhere. We saw a waterfall, saw some just gorgeous scenes, bamboo forest, and just all really, really beautiful things. So Japan is actually dominated by 2 religions. One's Shinto, and the other one is Buddhism. Now, Shinto was the one that came first, and it's a pantheistic religion. So they pretty much have a god for essentially everything you think of. So rock, sky, tree, wood, I don't know, just like everything. Wisdom, prosperity, river, all that type of stuff. Buddhism came later, and one of the reasons Buddhism was this is kind of very like a simple reason, but one of the reasons why Buddhism was able to thrive with Shintoism was because for Shinto, they have many gods, and Buddhism has one, so to them, what's one more god? So Buddhism got to thrive there as well when it was introduced from India, and the general idea is that when you die, Buddha takes you to heaven, but in your lifetime, you're trying to seek enlightenment. So you seek enlightenment by a few methods. So one of the methods you do is you worship Buddha. So you'll see people at shrines and temples and things, and they'll go and they'll worship Buddha, and they'll pray to Buddha, and so on. One of the other ways you can do it is Zen Buddhism. So that's where like yoga and meditation and prayer and all type of stuff, doing all those very calming things can hopefully get you enlightenment there. And another way they can do it is through physical feat. So when we were in Kyoto, we were on a tour group, and we were told about these monks that live in the nearby mountains called marathon monks. Now, marathon monks, as the name kind of suggests, these are monks that are kind of like secluded from civilization, and from when they wake up to when they go to bed at night, they start walking, and they'll pray, and they'll meditate, and they'll just walk and walk and walk and walk and walk. And they'll go for literally like a whole marathon a day, so 26 plus miles in a day. Johanna and I were pulling 15 like miles-ish every single day in Japan, and our feet are like aching by the end of it, and so I can't imagine what these guys are going through. And so through physical feat and the pain that you feel through all these physical things that you're doing, hopefully you can reach enlightenment that way. And so one of the things we got to see there is a lot of these Shinto and Buddhist temples and shrines and altars and things. And so the architecture is just very unlike anything you can see here in America, and it's very beautiful. Some of it is very ornate. So you see some like gold and some like very intricate design work in there. Some of them, like that one, is like gold. So it's just very beautiful, and but when you're there and you're just experiencing all this as a Christian, you just can't help but think, man, but like, all these people have given into a lie, and they're worshiping false gods and idols and that type of thing. And so, as cool as it was to see that, you're kind of like really sobered by the fact of what is actually happening at these shrines and temples and things. So, one of the passages I wanted to share with you this morning is something that this reminded me of a lot. Actually, a very similar case. In Acts 17, where we're going to be today, verses 16 through 34, Paul goes to Athens, and he is just seeing temples and stuff to all sorts of gods everywhere. And this is what we saw too. There's shrines everywhere here in Japan. For instance, and they're very sacred. So, for instance, if a company buys this plot of land, there's a temple on it, and let's just say they want to build a skyscraper, what they would do is they wouldn't destroy the shrine. They would just dismantle it really quick, build the skyscraper, and put the shrine right on top. So it's just completely untouched. And so, you walk down the street, you turn a corner, there's a shrine right there. You walk across the train station over, there's a shrine there. So everywhere there's these shrines. And we're going to see that with Paul here in Athens. So we're going to be starting in verse 16. I'm going to read through and just stop periodically and talk about some of these verses. Now, verse 16 says this. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, so if you see the line above verse 15, Paul is waiting for, I think, Silas and Timothy, and in Athens. And so even after, in this time, Rome has really ascended and is now the superpower that exists in the world. And so even though Rome was such, Athens was still the intellectual capital of the world. So think Oxford and Harvard and Yale and Stanford all kind of rolled into one. And Athens was also the center for art and athletics, and it housed one of the largest stadiums for sports, and it was the site of the original Olympics when it returned in 1896. We'll continue on. His spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. Now, my wife has been to Athens, and she's told me that there are indeed temple ruins everywhere. And so, just like we saw in Japan, there's temples and altars and things like that everywhere to all these many different gods. Verse 17, he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Now, the marketplace in ancient cities was like the cultural center, and it wasn't just the place where you shopped. So, Paul's not sitting in a Target checkout line just trying to pick up people and talk about religion stuff. He's actually in a place where it's a very cultural center, and people talk about stuff. Very popular place. Verse 18. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. Now, Epicureans were basically hedonists, so they're about pleasure. These guys lived it up. They didn't really care too much about the world. I know the kids don't really say YOLO anymore, but that's pretty much the mantra of an Epicurean. You only live once, so live it up. The Stoics were pantheists, so these guys believed God was in everything, so very similar to Hindus today. And they were all about self-control. They didn't want to be affected by change. They're not worried by change. Pain didn't bother them. Pleasure didn't seduce them or anything like that. Think Spock from Star Trek. That's a good idea of what a Stoic is. And some said, what does this babbler wish to say? And so babbler, in this sense, has a very derogatory term. It means bird that picks up seeds and spits them back out without digesting them. So think a chicken, right? Babblers were people who rambled on about ideas that they picked up from other people without really understanding them. And so they kind of saw him as a second-class mind. They kind of written off Paul already because they just thought he didn't intellectually measure up. Others said he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. Verse 19, and they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now the Athenians and the foreigners who live there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. Now, historians say that this is kind of like that philosophers in those days were always on the lookout for like new gods that can join the pantheon. So for Paul, this is, to them, in regards to Paul, this is kind of like an interview process and saying, like, does this new faith that you're presenting have the intellectual chops to join what we're doing? So verse 22. So Paul is standing in the midst of the Areopagus saying, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in everywhere you are very religious." The word religious here could be positive or negative. Some translations say superstitious, which obviously would be a negative type of connotation with it. Some translations say spiritual, which would be more of a positive connotation to it. I like to think that Paul went for the double meaning here. Paul's a smart guy, very sly dog. I'm sure he meant the double meaning here. Verse 23, "For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.'" And so this God was their just-in-case God, just in case the real God didn't get represented and covered in the thousands of statues that they already had. Now, what there you worship as unknown, I proclaim this to you. Now watch what he does here in 24. "The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything." What Paul does here is he points out the logical problems with their approach to God. So he asks them, does it make sense that the God who created everything and is all-powerful could be contained in a temple, or would you even need to put out food at an altar for him? God doesn't need anything. "And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek him and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him." Oh. So Paul is actually doing two things here. First, he's saying that the real God is not some just tribal deity that's in charge of some sphere of nature or something like that. The Athenians had, the Greeks had gods for every different sector. So there's God of like the sea, and the God of nature and the sky, and just for everything. And so he's saying that the real God is the creator of the whole earth and mankind. Now, the second thing that Paul is saying is that he's saying that the biggest pursuit that somebody can have in their life is to find this one true God. Greek and Roman gods that they served were always as a means to an end. For instance, they would only worship them in order to get something out. Whereas for God, for Jesus, to have him and be in his presence and to have a relationship with him, that is the desire that we should be seeking. So for instance, these guys would worship other gods in order to get something. So for instance, they would have a god like Artemis, the goddess of prosperity and money. So if you wanted that stuff, you would go to her temple and make offerings. There was Athena, the goddess of wisdom and politics. So if you wanted to be smart and have wisdom, you worship her. Then there's Nike, right, the goddess of victory, worshipped by athletes and warriors and Michael Jordan. Worshiping her made you run faster, jump higher, and soar above the competition. There's Aphrodite, the goddess of sexuality, beauty, and fertility. And here's a god I like, Cloacina, the goddess of the sewer system. I'm not honestly sure what she's worshipped for, or even how you make an offering to her. I don't know if I want to know that, but sometimes we light a candle in our bathroom, so maybe that counts. I don't know. Now, we saw this, and my wife and I saw this in Japan. We saw a lot of saw both locals and tourists, so it didn't really matter who it was, just praying to these false gods and worshiping idols in order to attain something. So what you're seeing on the screen is basically all these prayers that people write down and hang on this board. Now, we would go through and we'd read some of them, and pretty much 100% of the time, it's people wishing for stuff. So wishing for health, wishing for prosperity, wishing for good grades on a test, hoping they can find that perfect someone or something. And so just like And again, it wasn't just like local Japanese doing this. It was tourists. It was everybody. And we don't see just this in Japan. We see this here in America too. People are looking to other things in order to give them that fulfillment and joy that only God can bring. And so really all these gods that the Greeks worshiped was a means to something. So whether it was prosperity or power or smoother bowel movements, whatever was important to you is what you worshiped. So what Paul's saying is, he says that God is so glorious and transcendent that he's his own reward. God is his own reward. And he's not sought out as a means to anything else. And a little bit ahead of myself there. So in the middle of verse 27, yet he is actually not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. Now, a very interesting thing here, you can see that it's written in, there's some quotes there, some quotes within the quotes. Paul's actually not quoting scripture. He's quoting a song written about Zeus in 600 BC. And as we read on, it says, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. So Paul, again, is not quoting scripture. He's quoting a poem called Phenomena, written by a Stoic poet. And Paul is well-versed in their culture and he knows it well enough that he can ask the right questions and he can poke the right holes into their logic and beliefs in order to get and ask them the right questions in order that they may, that their faith may be challenged. Now, the conclusion against their religious approach is this. So, verse 29, being then God's offspring, we ought to not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. So, if God is the creator, it's foolish to think that we can, reduce him to something that we can hold in our hands. I love many of my pastor friends, and it kind of drives me crazy when they start debating theology and stuff because, while it's good to do that sometimes, they're arguing about things that, we just may never find out in this lifetime. And so we have a God that's so humongous and so infinite and intricate that you're just not going to know everything about him, which, can be frustrating at times, but, it's just one of those things we have to accept. And so Paul comes down to verse 30, where he starts to go into the gospel. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. Oops. All right, read on to 31. Because he has fixed on a day that he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and this is he who has given assurance by all raising him from the dead. So Jesus has come. He is God descended from heaven, and God has given us proof that he's the one true God by raising him from the dead. So let's look very quickly at what we can draw from this passage and draw a few things out that Paul does. So the first thing is to be provoked by the idolatry. So when Paul saw the impressive structures of Athens, they didn't intimidate him, they didn't seduce him, they provoked him. And when I say provoked, they urged him into action. And so when you see idolatrous structures in our society, what is your reaction to that stuff? Tim Keller says this, look at whatever buildings in your city are the biggest. Those usually indicate the idols. Now, when we look at Tucson's downtown, some of the tall buildings, those are dedicated to finance. So money is clearly a common idol that people worship in the hopes that money will bring them, of course, the happiness and joy and fulfillment and purpose that only God can give. Though it's not structurally tall, the U of A is a big entity in itself and kind of a representation of education. And education can be an idol. But hear me well, education is a great and wonderful thing. Everybody should be educated. But people can place too much faith in education in the hopes that it alone is going to provide you joy and fulfillment and purpose apart from God. So in a broader sense, if we look at kind of what's coming later this month, we have Thanksgiving and then Black Friday right afterwards. We have people that are going to be lining up at just really terrible times in the morning to get doorbusters and good deals. But you have people lining up for stuff that people think are going to provide them that joy and fulfillment that only Christ can give. And so idols can take all sorts of forms. And ultimately, we as people are trying to fill a God-sized hole in our hearts that with stuff that's never going to satisfy. So be provoked by the idolatry. If you're not provoked by the idolatry and you find yourself really at home in the world, then you might be what we would call worldly. But if you're one of those people who sees all the idolatry in the world, maybe gets angry or disappointed about where things are headed and just writes everyone off, then you're probably out of the touch with the gospel as well. Paul was provoked by the idolatry. He didn't run from the people of Athens. He ran towards them, and he ran towards them in compassion. And so this is what we need to be. We need to be people deeply aware of our culture, able to dialogue with it and be untainted by it. I really love, last Sunday, one of our members, Carol Groen, just had a launch of her new book. It's a book that deals with the LGBTQ community and ministering to families with members who are such. She's actually teaching a Bible study in January in regards to that book, and that's something I'd love to attend because I'm not just talking about it from the idea of the pastor, but just interacting with a lot of young people nowadays and some growing things in our culture. I would very much love to learn and know how to minister to as much people as I can, especially this community. So she's starting that Bible study in January, and hopefully, if you're interested in it, you can make it as well. So here's the thing: we have to get to know our culture. We have to pay attention to it. Paul had spent a lot of time in Athens, getting to know them, so he understood what they believed and what they thought. And so since we live here, we should be striving to understand the needs and people here in Northwest Tucson so that we can better connect them with the one who can meet the needs that they're searching for. Which leads to this, our second point for today, which is make the unknown God known. So the core of Paul's message was the true God is so much bigger than their idols could contain. One of the chief characteristics of all false religions is that they just have this shrunken down view of God. God gets reduced to the size of something that we can easily explain or manipulate or get something else that we want, like prosperity or power. But the real God that we worship is so large and so infinite and wise that he's often unexplainable. And as I said before, it can be kind of frustrating, but if God is infinitely wise, then of course there's going to be stuff that we just don't understand about him or his plan in this lifetime. I like what Evelyn Underhill says. He says this: if God were small enough to be understood, he wouldn't be big enough to be worshipped. So the real God is going to baffle you sometimes, and he's certainly not just a means to an end. He's not just a means to a better family, a better home life, more prosperity, more money, a better job, and so on. The real God is better than all those things. He is his own reward. The wonder of heaven is not going to be that you're going to be in heaven and that the streets of gold and everything's great. The wonder of heaven is that you get to be in the presence of God and you get to worship him and get to learn and know him better for all of eternity. So in the end, Paul gets to the part of his message where the greatness of God is most on display. He preaches the gospel as well as the resurrection. So we'll look at the last few verses, actually start in verse 32. Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed. Now as a believer, you're going to encounter one of these three reactions from people. You're going to get those that mock. You're going to get those who hear the message and we're going to think about it. And then you're going to get those reactions where people may join you. And if you're not getting these reactions, then you're probably not preaching the message. And by the way, just to take notice of verse 34 here, just the order of things. Some men joined him and believed. It wasn't they believed and then joined him, but they joined Paul, became his disciples, and eventually believed. Nobody there got saved on the spot. And sometimes, in church life, that can be a win. You're talking with your neighbor or coworker or something like that, and you invite them to church or a Bible study, and they come with you. That can be a win. But ultimately, what you want to do is push them to answer one of the greatest questions that Jesus ever asked any of us, which is, who do you say that I am? So, in the end, here we are in our city, surrounded by idolatry. Are we provoked by all the idols? Are we seeing our city and its people through the lens of the gospel? Or do you feel worldly and feel at home here in this culture? 90% of Tucson is unchurched or never church. People wake up on a Sunday morning and they probably think about going to church as much as I think about going to Thursday night bingo, which is 0, by the way. And so honestly, they wake up on a Sunday morning, just want to go get breakfast or go work out or whatever they want to do or just sleep in or something. Church is the last thing on their mind. And so with that, people are trying to fill these God-sized holes in their lives with things that are never going to satisfy them. And so the challenge I leave you with today is this: does your life reflect one that is making the unknown God known? Is it obvious to people that when they see you and talk to you that you are making the unknown God known? Let's close in prayer.